A pattern language is a method of describing good design practices within a field of expertise. The term was coined by architect Christopher Alexander and popularized by his book A Pattern Language. A pattern language is an attempt to express the deeper wisdom of what brings aliveness within a particular field of human endeavor, through a set of interconnected expressions arising from that wisdom. Aliveness is one placeholder term for the quality that has no name, a sense of wholeness, spirit, or grace, that while of varying form, is precise and empirically verifiable. Some advocates of this design approach claim that ordinary people can use it to successfully solve very large, complex design problems. Like all languages, a pattern language has vocabulary, syntax, and grammar, but a pattern language applies to some complex activity other than communication. In pattern languages for design, the parts break down in this way: the language description, the vocabulary, is a collection of named, described solutions to problems in a field of interest. These are called design patterns. So, for example, the language for architecture describes items like settlements, buildings, rooms, windows, latches, etc. Each solution includes syntax, a description that shows where the solution fits in a larger, more comprehensive or more abstract design. This automatically links the solution into a web of other needed solutions. For example, rooms have ways to get light, and ways to get people in and out. The solution includes grammar that describes how the solution solves a problem or produces a benefit. So, if the benefit is unneeded, the solution is not used. Perhaps that part of the design can be left empty to save money or other resources. If people do not need to wait to enter a room, a simple doorway can replace a waiting room. In the language description, grammar and syntax cross-index to other named solutions, so the designer can quickly think from one solution to related, needed solutions, and document them in a logical way. In Alexander's book, the patterns are in decreasing order by size, with a separate alphabetic index. The web of relationships in the index of the language provides many paths through the design process. This simplifies the design work because designers can start the process from any part of the problem they understand and work toward the unknown parts. At the same time, if the pattern language has worked well for many projects, there is reason to believe that even a designer who does not completely understand the design problem at first will complete the design process, and the result will be usable. For example, skiers coming inside must shed snow and store equipment. The messy snow and boot cleaners should stay outside. The equipment needs care, so the racks should be inside. It really is a language. There is even an analogy to spelling or phonology, in the documentation standards for the designs and patterns. Without these, the people building the design won't be able to read the design. What is a pattern? When a designer designs something, whether a house, computer program, or lamp, they must make many decisions about how to solve problems. A single problem is documented with its typical place, and use with the most common and recognized good solutions seen in the wild, like the examples seen in dictionaries. Each such entry is a single design pattern. Each pattern has a name, a descriptive entry, and some cross-references, much like a dictionary entry. A documented pattern should explain why that solution is good in the pattern's contexts. Many patterns form a language. Just as words must have grammatical and semantic relationships to each other in order to make a spoken language useful, design patterns must be related to each other in position and utility order to form a pattern language. Alexander's work describes a process of decomposition, in which the designer has a problem, selects a solution, then discovers new, smaller problems resulting from the larger solution. Occasionally, the smaller problems have no solution, and a different larger solution must be selected. Eventually all of the remaining design problems are small enough or routine enough to be solved by improvisation by the builders, and the design is done. The actual organizational structure is left to the discretion of the designer, depending on the problem. This explicitly lets a designer explore a design, starting from some small part. When this happens, it's common for a designer to realize that the problem is actually part of a larger solution. At this point, the design almost always becomes a better design. in the language. Therefore, each pattern has to indicate its relationships to other patterns and to the language as a whole. This gives the designer using the language a great deal of guidance about the related problems that must be solved. The most difficult part of having an outside expert apply a pattern language is in fact to get a reliable, complete list of the problems to be solved. Of course, the people most familiar with the problems are the people that need a design. So, Alexander famously advocated on-site improvisation by concerned, empowered users, as a powerful way to form very workable large-scale initial solutions, maximizing the utility of a design, and minimizing the design rework. The desire to empower users of architecture was, in fact, what led Alexander to undertake a pattern language project for architecture in the first place. Design problems in a context. An important aspect of design patterns is to identify and document the key ideas that make a good system different from a poor system, and to assist in the design of future systems. The idea expressed in a pattern should be general enough to be applied in very different systems within its context, but still specific enough to give constructive guidance. The range of situations in which the problems and solutions addressed in a pattern applies called its context. An important part in each pattern is to describe this context. Examples can further illustrate how the pattern applies to very different situations. For instance, Alexander's pattern "A Place to Wait" addresses bus stops in the same way as waiting rooms in a surgery, while still proposing helpful and constructive solutions. The Gang of Four book by ALll proposes solutions that are independent of the programming language, and the program's application domain. Still, the problems and solutions described in a pattern can vary in their level of abstraction and generality on the one side, and specificity on the other side. In the end, this depends on the author's preferences. However, even a very abstract pattern will usually contain examples that are, by nature, absolutely concrete and specific. Patterns can also vary in how far they are proven in the real world. Alexander gives each pattern a rating by 0, 1 or 2 stars, indicating how well they are proven in real-world examples. It is generally claimed that all patterns need at least some existing real-world examples. It is, however, conceivable to document yet unimplemented ideas in a pattern-like format. The patterns in Alexander's book also vary in their level of scale, some describing how to build a town or neighborhood, others dealing with individual buildings and the interior of rooms. Alexander sees the low-scale artifacts as constructive elements of the large-scale world, so they can be connected to a hierarchic network. Balancing of forces equals, a pattern must characterize the problems that it is meant to solve, the context or situation where these problems arise, and the conditions under which the proposed solutions can be recommended. Often these problems arise from a conflict of different interests or forces. A pattern emerges as a dialogue that will then help to balance the forces and finally make a decision. For instance, there could be a pattern suggesting a wireless telephone. The forces would be the need to communicate, and the need to get other things done at the same time. A very specific pattern would be just wireless telephone. More general patterns would be wireless device, or secondary activity, suggesting that a secondary activity should not interfere with other activities. Though quite unspecific in its context, the forces in the secondary activity pattern are very similar to those in wireless telephone. Thus, the competing forces can be seen as part of the essence of a design concept expressed in a pattern. Patterns contain their own rationale. Usually a pattern contains a rationale referring to some given values. For Christopher Alexander, it is most important to think about the people who will come in contact with a piece of architecture. One of his key values is making these people feel more alive. He talks about the quality without a name. More generally, we could say that a good system should be accepted, welcomed and happily embraced as an enrichment of daily life by those who are meant to use it, or, even better, by all people it affects. For instance, when discussing a street cafe copyright, Alexander discusses the possible desires of a guest, but also mentions people who just walk by. The same thinking can be applied to technical devices such as telephones and cars, to social structures like a team working on a project, or to the user interface of a computer program. The qualities of a software system, for instance, could be rated by observing whether users spend their time enjoying or struggling with the system. By focusing on the impacts on human life, we can identify patterns that are independent from changing technology, and thus find timeless quality. Generic structure and layout. Usually the author of a pattern language or collection chooses a generic structure for all the patterns it contains, breaking each into generic sections like context, problem statement, solution, etc. See Alexander's patterns. For instance, each consists of a short name, a rating, a sensitizing picture, the context description, the problem statement, a longer part of text with examples and explanations, a solution statement, a sketch and further references. This structure and layout is sometimes referred to as the Alexandrian form. Alexander uses a special text layout to mark the different sections of his patterns. For instance, the problem statement and the solution statement are printed in bold font, the latter is always preceded by the therefore keyword. Some authors instead use explicit labels, which creates some degree of redundancy. Meaningful names. When design is done by a team, pattern names will form a vocabulary they can share. This makes it necessary for pattern names to be easy to remember and highly descriptive. Some examples from Alexander's works are window place and a place to wait. Aggregation in an associative network. A pattern language, as thought by Alexander, contains links from one pattern to another, so when trying to apply one pattern in a project, a designer is pushed to other patterns that are considered helpful in its context. In Alexander's book, such links are collected in the references part, and echoed in the link patterns context part, thus the overall structure is a directed graph. A pattern that is linked to in the references usually addresses a problem of lower scale, that is suggested as a part of the higher scale problem. For instance, the public outdoor room pattern has a reference to stair seats. Even without the pattern description, these links, along with meaningful names, carry a message. When building a place outside where people can spend time, consider to surround it by stairs where people can sit. If you are planning an office, consider to arrange workspaces in small groups. Alexander argues that the connections in the network can be considered even more meaningful than the text of the patterns themselves. The links in Alexander's book clearly result in a hierarchic network. Alexander draws a parallel to the hierarchy of a grammar, that is one argument for him to speak of the pattern language. The idea of linking is generally accepted among pattern authors, though the semantic rationale behind the links may vary. Some authors, however, like ALll in design patterns, make only little use of pattern linking, possibly because it did not make that much sense for their collection of patterns. In such a case we would speak of the pattern catalog rather than a pattern language. Usage. Alexander encouraged people who used his system to expand his language with patterns of their own. In order to enable this, his books do not focus strictly on architecture or civil engineering. He also explains the general method of pattern languages. The original concept for the book A Pattern Language was that it would be published in the form of a 3-ring binder, so that pages could easily be added later. This proved impractical in publishing. The pattern language approach has been used to document expertise in diverse fields. Some examples are architectural patterns, computer science patterns, human-computer interaction patterns, educational patterns, social action patterns, and group facilitation patterns. The pattern language approach has also been recommended as a way to promote civic intelligence by helping to coordinate actions for diverse people and communities who are working together on significant shared problems. Alexander's specifications for using pattern languages as well as creating new ones remain influential, and his books are referenced for style by experts in unrelated fields. It is important to note that notations such as UML or the flowchart symbol collection are not pattern languages. They could more closely be compared to an alphabet. Their symbols could be used to document a pattern language, but they are not a language by themselves. A recipe or other sequential set of steps to be followed, with only one correct path from start to finish, is also not a pattern language. However, the process of designing a new recipe might benefit from the use of a pattern language. Simple example of a pattern equals, name, chocolate chip ratio, context, you are baking chocolate chip cookies in small batches for family and friends, consider these patterns first, sugar ratio, flour ratio, egg ratio, problem, determine the optimum ratio of chocolate chips to cookie dough, solution, observe that most people consider chocolate to be the best part of the chocolate chip cookie. Also observe that too much chocolate may prevent the cookie from holding together, decreasing its appeal. Since you are cooking in small batches, cost is not a consideration. Therefore, use the maximum amount of chocolate chips that results in a really sturdy cookie. Consider next, nut ratio or cooking time or freezing method. Origin: Christopher Alexander, an architect and author, coined the term pattern language. He used it to refer to common problems of the design and construction of buildings and towns and how they should be solved. The solutions proposed in the book include suggestions ranging from how cities and towns should be structured to where windows should be placed in a room. The framework and philosophy of the pattern language approach was initially popularized in the book A Pattern Language that was written by Christopher Alexander and 5 colleagues at the Center for Environmental Structure in Berkeley, California in the late 1970s. While a pattern language contains 253 patterns from the first pattern, independent regions to the last, things from your life, Alexander's book The Timeless Way of Building goes into more depth about the motivation and purpose of the work. The following definitions of pattern and pattern language are paraphrased from a pattern language. A pattern is a careful description of a perennial solution to a recurring problem within a building context, describing one of the configurations that brings life to a building. Each pattern describes a problem that occurs over and over again in our environment, and then describes the core solution to that problem, in such a way that you can use the solution a million times over, without ever doing it the same way twice. A pattern language is a network of patterns that call upon one another. Patterns help us remember insights and knowledge about design and can be used in combination to create solutions. Since the original publications, thinking in terms of patterns and pattern languages has been applied to other fields, including software design, user interface design, classroom curriculum, and social change. Application domains: Christopher Alexander's idea has been adopted in other disciplines, often much more heavily than the original application to architecture as depicted the book A Pattern Language. Recent examples include in software engineering and, more generally, to computer science, as well as in interaction designs. Pedagogical patterns are used to document good practices in teaching. The book Liberating Voices, A Pattern Language for Communication Revolution, containing 136 patterns for using information and communication to promote sustainability, democracy and positive social change, was published in 2008. The DEC Group Works, A Pattern Language for Bringing Life to Meetings and Other Gatherings, was published in 2011. Recently, patterns were also introduced into systems architecture design. Chess strategy and tactics involve many patterns from opening to checkmate. See also, mind map, concept map, design pattern, rule of thumb, software design pattern, feng shui, typology. References. Further reading: Christopher Alexander, Sarah Ishikawa, Murray Silverstein. A Collection of Patterns Which Generate Multi-Service Centers in Declan and Margaret Kennedy, The Inner City. Architects Yearbook 14, ALll, London. ISBN 0236-15431-1. Alexander, C. A Pattern Language, Towns, Buildings, Construction. USA, Oxford University Press. ISBN 978-0-19-5019-3. Alexander, C. The Timeless Way of Building. USA, Oxford University Press. ISBN 978-0-19-502402-9. Schuller, D. Liberating Voices, A Pattern Language for Communication Revolution. USA, MIT Press. ISBN 978-0-262-69366-0. Liedtner, Helmut, Pattern Theory, Introduction and Perspectives on the Tracks of Christopher Alexander. ISBN 1505637430. External links. About patterns and general tips for writing pattern languages, by Ward Cunningham, essay on the pattern language as it relates to urban design, use of patterns for scenario development for large-scale aerospace projects, lean startup business model pattern, what is a quality use case? From the book Patterns for Effective Use Cases, Characteristics of Group Facilitation Patterns. Online pattern collections patternlanguage.com, by Christopher Alexander, archetypes.net, Collaborative Pattern Language Project for Architecture, Fuse Grid, a contemporary urban pattern, a collection and synthesis of neighborhood patterns, reliableprosperity.net, patterns for building a restorative, socially just, and reliably prosperous society, patterns.org, patterns for HCI, the Portland Pattern Repository, hosted by Cunningham & Cunningham, Incorporated. Yahoo! Design Pattern Library, GroupWorks, a pattern language for bringing life to meetings and other gatherings, the core protocols, a set of team communication patterns, liberating voices. Pattern Language Project, hosted by http://www.publicsphereproject.org. Public Sphere Project. Pattern Language Books Liberating Voices, a pattern language for communication revolution, Schuller, Douglas. MIT Press, 2008.